My dear friends, the first reading, as well as being historically accurate, is a brilliant piece of prose. So much so that one day in the English class, in the sixth form now, that would the age of 17 or so, 18, the English master giving a lesson that particular day on various forms of speech, figures of speech, things which can be used to make prose more interesting. He came up with the use of, now, a whole list of things, litotes, hyperbole, but then he came into repetition, and he cited this very passage because it couldn't be put better and corresponds probably to what was going on, the very words that were being heard in that room above the gate where the king was just trying to cope with this grief, which is unexpected given that actually Absalom died on the wrong side. Remember, there was rebellion against the king and Absalom was part of it. And so we have this mourning and weeping. My son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died in your place. Absalom, my son, my son. The Oriental character is well able to behave in that way, so we have here a scene corresponding pretty closely to what was historically taking place. But we forget the other bit, that actually we are indebted to these good storytellers. They wrote well, and there are brilliant, well-narrated stories right through the Old Testament. And it's also happening in the New. What do we have? The very words that the Lord used. That means that this has been transmitted to us by somebody who heard them. Now we know that Peter would have given much of the Gospel orally to Mark. There is that link between Peter and Mark, and we have it also in the origin of the church that Mark, under Peter's direction, founded, Alexandria. Remember the great link between those two churches in the early centuries, the apostolic churches, patriarchates. Well, what happens here? Talitha cum, the very words that the Lord used, and they made such an impression on these three apostles that they remembered them. The echo in the air still, especially because the root cum would be the root coming through in anything to do with the resurrection, both in Hebrew and Aramaic. So it had overtones. When we have the Lord being quoted here in the original, we have what we call in biblical studies the ipsissima verba, the very words of the Lord being uttered, and they are dotted in the Gospel. Now, I want to return for a second to the first reading, because there's something else. Have you noticed? Well, you probably wouldn't, because it's not all here. You'd have to go to the full text in the second book of Samuel to see the crescendo going on, because they have reduced this to a size which can be read in church. But actually it's more dramatic still, because the king is looking there in the distance to see if anyone is coming. Or if he can't spend all the time doing it, somebody else is doing it for him, the watchman, and reporting regularly. So the watchman now sees somebody else coming first of all, and says so to the king, running there at a distance. And when he learns that he's on his own, this king says that he's travelling on his own. That means it must be good news. So a bit of news comes, and he's then asked to stand aside. And then this other person, the Cushite, is cited. Who is it? And then we have this unfolding. It's actually extremely powerful. Good news, my lord the king. The Lord has vindicated your cause today in ridding you of all who rebelled against you. All who rebelled against you. Is all well with young Absalom? May the enemies of my lord the king be like him. Now the point is this, that's immediately what the king is afraid of, and the reaction is explosive. And he disappears because he can't bear anyone to see him. It's an unfolding. Now I want to zoom into that for a second, because we've lost the unfolding. We've lost the crescendo. The whole civilized world right now is into the immediate. There's a difference. It's not the same way of living. Now, it just hit me strongly when just the other day I was answering a letter, a classical letter, which had come from Italy, and the letter actually went into the question of the letter. It went into the fact that hardly anyone writes a letter, and went into a whole analysis of how it's done now. Even when one expresses condolences, anything at all, it happens in a different way, and the whole tone of life is towards knowing right now, immediately, all that has to be known, and answering right now and getting an answer straight away, immediately. There is no patience on earth. All is in the immediate. Now go back. Here it is a human being orally carrying a message. Actually, as recent as the First World War, the running to carry a message was important. They used to call them the runners. They risked their lives, but they'd run around the trenches and they had to get the messages back to the sergeants and officials there commanding. Bit by bit, we have got into means by which we now have bypassed even the written. Now, I want to stay for a second, however, with what's been lost, because it does affect us all. There is a famous Dutch picture called The Letter, and it's in one of these fairly well-to-do families. By a grand piano, there's some letter being opened and read. A lady is doing it, a demoiselle, and one is interested to know, what are they all thinking, what are they all looking at, what's in this letter. And the whole question of what can come within an envelope is, as it were, detected in that picture. What a letter meant. And that's fairly recent now, insofar as actually there wasn't all that much of a difference between that painting, which goes back a few centuries maybe, and what we still grew up with. For a long time in our house there wasn't even a telephone. But the letters were important. And actually I remember, strangely enough, that even in the pop world of the time, letters could still be themes for lyrics. Please Mr. Postman, of the Beatles and so on. Will you wait and see, is there a letter? Just a letter for me. It's always that tension, what's in the letter? The letter. And then one sees, especially if a person dies, what a letter could be. We have a reconstruction of the past still there on the paper. That is no longer going to be there. Actually, strangely enough, but we've lost partly in the process of modernization with regard to photography, because there aren't all that many printed pictures around compared to what we had before. They're digitalized, therefore they're virtual. They can be printed, but often they're not. Before, that also could be part of a letter. Indeed, postcards were written on the back of a picture in early times. Now, what am I saying? It hit me that we can actually still gain quality life if we become aware of the problem of this plethora of actually immediate and therefore quite often fairly shallow communication. Because what's happening? It's at that point is taking all one's attention, one will answer straight away, but the calm mode of going through life, able to engage for long periods with a book, with thought, with prayer, with a study, with an analysis, that has become very, very difficult. We're immediately aggressed in our thought. We are taken off course in our thought. And if you multiply that by a whole day, it's a lot of dispersion of interiority. It's a way of living which is fairly new on this planet, and we don't yet know how to cope with it. I just jump back for a second to the Gospel, because here we have to do with also, strangely enough, the other end. Life is going to go, it's going to wind out. We won't feel it going as much as we would have done before, because we are never alone with our thoughts. We're always immediately cancelling boredom. All the time it's cancelled immediately. We don't have the pain of having time being heavy on our hands. It's not the same as before. A bleep takes it away. So we don't notice time going. It will go quickly, very quickly indeed, and one day we'll find, oh, it's gone already, my whole life. Which brings us to the place where it ends, the cemetery. Now, did you notice that the Lord said, she is not dead, but sleeping, which gives us the word cemetery, koimeterion. It's the sleeping place, it's the resting place in Greek, and we have it in one or two passages of the New Testament, fallen asleep in the Lord. St. Paul uses that expression. So, there one sees precisely the great unwinding which we can't feel anymore, but which is going to be the long full stop. As someone once said, one is a long time dead, compared actually with the amount of time we have alive. And strangely enough, this verse indirectly sometimes finds itself onto graves, because if one looks around in Britain, the verses on graves, one sometimes finds an echo of this one, not dead but sleepeth, or something of that nature. And it's something we ought to think about. One way of doing it is to make sure that we actually become so aware of the damage that's done to our souls by this hyped up mode, that we make a double effort to make absolutely sure that in the day is an inbuilt moment of nothing but, so that there is nothing to contaminate that possibility of 1 hour or so with him alone, with only him, because he can't get through. And it's our choice. Do we want an interior life or a squandered interior? A thinly spread interior, given to every bleep in the air? It's worth it, because we're not here merely that long.